So much to look into. 1978 was a watershed year. So many terrible things happened. The assassination of Aldo Moro, the People's Temple, Jim Jones, the recognition that a culture in America, and I would say mostly California, had been under uh, spiritual uh, at that point, a spiritual domination or stranglehold on the part of the death cult. And I think people who follow this channel understand what I mean by the death cult. Let's look at this executive intelligence review, this whole issue that I'd like to get into. Here we have December 5th through 11th, 1978. Among other things, look at this, how Israeli intelligence is taking over the CIA. You know, uh, big names behind the death cult. Amazing. There's so much to get into. I'm just going to dig in anywhere. Look, you've had your nose rubbed in every gory detail of the mass deaths at Jonestown. And how many people remember this? I remember very clearly seeing it on television for the first time. And I have in my mind an association made with remember Electric Light Orchestra, that band from the 70s? And that music was playing when I saw it on TV. And I can't listen to ELO because I'm haunted by the images, the swollen bodies, and the horror that I felt at that time. So, so many decades later, I'm digging into this, trying to contextualize it. We're encouraged by the world we live in to see it as a sort of aberrant event that sort of emerged out of nowhere because people are intrinsically insane and irrational. But you begin, when you dig into this research, you begin to see it as part of a pattern, and you begin to connect dots. Who created the Jones cult, how they did it, and why. I'm reading here. Did you know that the People's Temple in Guyana was set up and operated as a drug running base? And drugs are the backbone. The dark money projects pretty much all draw from the illegal arms and illegal drugs, and increasingly human trafficking, to continue to unroll out these terrible plots against humanity. Jones's pedigree traces straight back to the CIA's infamous MK Ultra LSD project. Who knew? I had no idea about this at the time. Of course, I was just a kid. That Jones's injunction, "Die with dignity," is being pushed as a mass cult by Ted Kennedy. Anyone remember Ted Kennedy? And the so-called hospice movement. My God. Now look, we have today this burgeoning euthanasia business, and it's happening in I just saw a report in Western Australia, just off the charts. It's maybe the number one leading cause of premature death. And of course, in Canada, it's just, they give it out like candy. So we see sometimes these plots, they go out and they kind of take a sort of circumlocutive route, maybe indirect, but the basic trajectory of what they're trying to achieve, which is to get people to part with their lives, to see themselves as valued only to the extent that they are part of some kind of transhumanist agenda. But that, when you look at the WEF and what's that guy's name, Yuval Harari, talking about we're just hackable animals, the time when we thought that human beings were mysterious creatures with a soul, this is over. I mean, my God, how does he know that? How would anybody know that? Does anybody ever question among the technocratic set, are they ever aware that while they're cloaked in a kind of a dignity of false dignity of formalism and scientific method. It is, in fact, a faith-based death cult. So we see all of these, and of course, looking at what's been going on in Gaza, like the worst, absolutely the lowest in terms of human behavior, and the nadir of the death cult. We have here let's see, our report put together by counterintelligence and terrorism expert Jeffrey Steinberg, the very great Jeffrey Steinberg. I find out that LaRouche had an intelligence service, which is why you can see all this amazingly well-researched and heavily corroborated and brilliantly analytical work in EIR being shut out of, like, if you go to AI or you go to any source, they will act like none of this stuff exists. I pray for EIR. I hope it never gets shut down. I hope there are people out there archiving and keeping all of this stuff, because this is really what's going to get us through to a proper understanding of what's been going on. What LaRouche achieved. But let's go on here. This article I want to get to, but look how much brilliant stuff. I'm going to stick with this for a while. Amazing. Here is the special report. The big names behind the death cult. We know what that is. We see it in our culture. We feel it all around us. We're seeing it in the news. All right. Let's jump in. First, a U.S. congressman was gunned down in the jungles of Guyana, which I remember this. I was 15, but God, that stuff sears into the deeper recesses of your brain, maybe especially at that age. Then over 900 members of the People's Temple of Jim Jones died in a grisly sacrifice ritual. Then the mayor and city supervisor of San Francisco, the Jones cult's home base, were assassinated. Warnings of terrorism by Jones cult members and by former members. New cults threatening suicide and murder, with the stories interspersed in all the media amid the increasingly gruesome coverage of every aspect of the Jonestown massacre. Of every aspect? In fact, the American people, Congress, and professional law enforcement officials are now further from understanding the cause and significance of those events than they were when the first reports were flashed back from Jonestown. And this is an uncanny ability on the part of the empire to memory hold things with amazing speed. I was thinking about, remember the burning of the Notre Dame a few years back now? Geez, an event like that, you don't hear any mention. It's like it never happened. That's just a tiny sliver of the kinds of things that they've managed to memory hold. And the assassination of Aldo Moro also, when the LaRouche people were over there. There was an Italian publication that was connecting the dots back to the British Crown. And now every year at Aldo Moro, the anniversary of his death, there is no mention when they try to memorialize him and discuss the tragedy and to try to unearth it. They're up against a complete stone wall. We may never know, right? And in fact, we do know who was behind it. We know why it was done. And it's up to us to do this research and to keep these archives alive, in the sense that that we consult them, we duplicate them, we refer to them, we share them. While the media inundates the population with its own brand of death cultism, The real story, the big names behind the death cult, has gone unreported. Both the black propaganda in most media and the horrifying events themselves are no spontaneous sociological phenomena. As a careful examination of the facts shows, the whole hideous business was deliberately created, cultivated, and deployed by a closely knit group of conspirators whose control traces back, unsurprisingly, to the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, and the cult formations in which the power around the British monarchy is organized. Its purpose is to wreck the foundations of the American political system, beginning with the Carter White House, to establish the preconditions for a massive wave of Baader-Meinhof-style terrorism in the United States under the cover of fanatical pseudo-religious cults, and pseudo-religious is kind of redundant, and to remove all obstacles to the installation of Senator Edward Kennedy as president on or before January 20th, 1981. That, of course, didn't happen. My sense is that Reagan blindsided them in the way that Trump has blindsided them. And you remember there was an attempt on Reagan's life. And that was also not a spontaneous event erupting from a disturbed lone would-be assassin. Okay, going on. Sounds like Brave New World or 1984, a book that is now banned in many high schools all across America. The irony of that. It should. For the People's Temple and the rest of the scenario is all the product of a 40-year-long British intelligence project run into the United States under the case officership of Aldous Huxley, and employing a vast array of individuals and institutions at a cost running into the billions of dollars. The Satanists of London's oligarchy. The following report will provide the average citizen and the trained investigator with the evidence to identify the criminals behind the death cult movement, from the immediate controllers all the way to the top. Many have familiar names: Ted Kennedy, California Governor Jerry Brown, Health, Education, and Welfare Secretary Joseph Califano, Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, a long list of private institutions and contaminated government agencies acting as effective centers of SOE subversion in the United States put years of systemic and coordinated effort into Reverend Jones's little cult, and now they are reaping the payoff. But the mother of this entire network is to be found in the Tavistock Institute in London, which we've made many videos on this channel about Tavistock. If you're curious, this is the main temple of brain menticide and brainwashing globally. The SOE, Tavistock Institute in London, the SOE, the most secretive branch of British intelligence, and in the British monarchy's official chivalric order, the most venerable military and hospitaller order of St. John of Jerusalem, Knights of Malta, whom I believe are stage managing all of these hot conflicts around the planet. The oligarchists, sharing their devotion to the centuries-old cult of Isis and of its magical feudalist outlook, have duplicated themselves in microcosm in the zombies of Reverend Jones and other brainwashed kook groups. As if to flaunt the fact, one of the prime press outlets of the London oligarchs has virtually declared that the Jonestown massacre signals the beginning of a new cult of ISIS era. In its November 25th issue, the Rothschilds-owned London Economist ran an atrocity cover photo from Jonestown with the headline, "Is Satan Dead?" And inside, hailed the horrible events in Guyana as a manifestation albeit extreme and therefore distorted, of a new kind of religiosity sweeping the world. Wonder what that is. There are perhaps worse events to come, the economist predicted, and concluded that by the 21st century it would all lead to coherent new bodies of spiritual belief. Order out of chaos, maybe. Even more horrifying was the comment of one of Jerry Brown's advisors immediately after San Francisco Mayor George Moscone and the city supervisor Harvey Milk, both supporters of Jones, were murdered by a former city official, Dan White, right? That was his name? Dionysus is loose in California, he said. That is good news. The bad news is that it is so strange to people that they are afraid. Imagine that. People have honest, instinct-based aversion to a death cult agenda. Imagine that. That's the bad news, according to him. The immediate effects, the most visible impact of the Jonestown massacre thus far has been to set the Carter administration up for a scandal, paling Watergate by far. Well, they managed to put a lid on that. Having in hand the Guyanese government's public evidence that every prominent member of the British Allied Zionist lobby in government, with the significant omission of Ted Kennedy and Jacob Javits, endorsed or supported Jones's operation in Guyana, the executive branch has declared that it will not investigate. If, as has been threatened, cultists launch a retaliation, Carter could be forced to resign immediately. In one way, the stonewalling is not surprising. Not at all. Some in the administration, Califano and Mondale, for example, are up to their necks in the right to die movement that made the Jones cult possible, and in the vote fraud machine of George Moscone and Jerry Brown, of which Jones was a part. So voter disenfranchisement, vote rigging, all of this stuff. It goes back way before this, but now it's pretty much people accept it. It's like, well, they want people to vote, but what everybody wants to know, what measures are being taken, what are the chances of my vote actually counting because of 2020, right? But the real sponsor of this movement is the man who stands to reap the most immediate political benefit from Carter's downfall, Senator Kennedy, the man who publicly professes to be Carter's biggest supporter, is intending both to pick up the pieces of the Carter administration and to hasten the collapse of the U.S. into the sort of austerity regime typified by the hospice ethic of hustling the sick and the aged into low-cost coffins with the aid of heroin, LSD, and other drugs, which they basically achieved to a stunningly horrific effect with the COVID scam and the use of remdesivir, and what was the other one? And they killed off so many old people in the UK and in the US with these protocols. What was it? Over 80% of those who supposedly died of COVID were, more than that, 90% they were over the age of 80, and they all died nobody died. Everyone died in hospital. No one at home, and it was because of these basically like guillotine protocols they were imposing on people. So they find a way, one way or another. You see a continuum. Kissinger and Brzezinski's role. The role of Henry Kissinger in the Jonestown atrocity began with his preparation for Jones's migration to Guyana during his tenure as Secretary of State. I mean, think back. Who would have been able back then to connect any dot, like Kissinger and Jim Jones? My God, you would have to have been deeply in the know at the time. At the time, the Kissinger crowd facilitated the colonization They knew that this was to become a drug growing and drug distributing operation into the US with the standing London strategy of opium war against America. If you haven't read Dope Incorporated, you should read it, an EIR publication. I think Anton Chaikin was the main writer of that, and details how City of London, the British Opium War was then after China was turned on the US. And we still have a terrible opioid crisis in the United States. Moreover, going on, getting Jones's cult into the Guyana border region was an integral element of the more general British scenario for preparing the overthrow of Guyanese leader Forbes Burnham. I don't remember him. The Kissinger influence continues through current National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was himself personally responsible for quashing adequate security measures or intelligence on the danger to Congressman Ryan or others going to Jonestown to rescue inhabitants. Now the Federal Communications Commission has admitted to having it in its possession 1 full year's worth of tapes monitoring coded radio transmissions from the People's Republic, from the People's Temple, from the People's Temple to the US. But the agency responsible for decoding such monitorings and for supervising the FCC is the National Security Agency run by Zbigniew Brzezinski. The investigative method, the evidence presented in this report, is best understood as a set of 4 nested overlays. Each provides a detailed map of one feature of the overall operation and has frequent points of intersection with the other 3. The first overlay is the dossier of Jones and his temple that traces Jones's personal career from his recruitment into the British Fabian-founded Fellowship of Reconciliation to his days as a leading get-out-the-vote fraud politician in the 1976 elections, to his drug running operation in Guyana. The second is the network of private and official agencies that participated in CIA's MKUltra and LSD pilot project that got the counterculture started and where many of Jones's controllers were first trained in the science of cult creation. And I'll just add here that in my view, all the major religions are synthetic cults that were created by whatever given time period they come from oligarchical, very clever, very deeply researched oligarchical interests. Third is the hospice movement, the right to die goes respectable crowd that brings together Kennedy, the Order of St. John, and the cult philosophy of embracing death. Last is an examination of the California case where this entire tissue of conspiracy is effectively in place as the government of the state, with the sort of results now making lurid headlines around the world. What do we have here? Oh yeah, we'll maybe get to that another time. And this is kind of like a reaction video. So let's go on and get some background. On November 18, 1978, a fact-finding mission led by Congressman Leo Ryan, Democrat, California, investigating charges of drug trafficking and involuntary imprisonment of American citizens by the People's Temple of Reverend Jim Jones in Jonestown, Guyana, was gunned down by People's Temple members as they attempted to board their planes at the Port Kaituma airport. 5 people, including Representative Ryan, were killed and a dozen other members of the party injured. Moments after the ambush, Reverend Jim Jones assembled 800 to 900 of his zombie followers in the center of the temple commune and ordered them to commit human sacrifice by swallowing a lethal dose of cyanide mixed with a number of drugs and Kool-Aid. Hence the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Now popularized, comes from that. In case anyone's listening who is too young to remember. The potion administered by Jones and his medical assistant, Dr. Schacht, was described fully in the New York Daily News of November 22nd and is very similar to the Brompton mix used by the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, St. Christopher's Hospice in London. You can't make this stuff up. I know it's such an overused phrase, but my God. Parroting the Order of St. John's Hospice propaganda, Jones urged his psychotic followers on by extolling the virtues of dying with dignity. According to a survivor of the death cult ritual in Jonestown, many of the cultists accepted the potion only at gunpoint, and those who refused the spiked Kool-Aid were forcibly injected with the poison. Drug connection confirmed. On November 20th, an aide to Representative Ryan, who survived the weekend ordeal, delivered a statement to the press in San Francisco, which has been blacked out of the national media. He confirmed that the Ryan fact-finding group had uncovered drug-related matters involving Jones and the People's Temple. The following day, 2 reporters returning from the Jonestown scene reported that massive quantities of a wide variety of drugs were uncovered amidst the human rubble, far more drugs than needed to satisfy the medical needs of all of Guyana for up to a year. Also uncovered at the People's Temple scene was $500,000 in cash, large quantities of gold, and precious jewels estimated at $3 million, nothing to today's money, and a trunk containing over 800 US passports. Subsequent reports published in the New York Post indicate that an additional $3 million of US currency may have disappeared at the time of the mass suicides. Within the People's Temple complex, Jones maintained a remarkably sophisticated and high-powered ham radio system capable of transmitting to California and the mid-Atlantic states. Not only were American intelligence agencies aware of this illegal radio system, it had been monitored by the Federal Communications Commission for several years as part of an official investigation. The People's Temple probably just monitoring to make sure nothing got in the way, right? The People's Temple also maintained at least 3 large trawler yachts registered in the port of Mobile, Alabama. The trawlers operated in the Caribbean waters between Guyana and the United States and were known by US and Guyanese authorities to bypass normal customs channels, often by anchoring in international waters just outside the 12-mile coastal limit. These trawlers were confirmed to have smuggled illegal weapons into Jonestown. What was Jones running? According to federal records and on the scene in observation, Jones was running drugs, illegal automatic and semi-automatic weapons, and other contraband on a sufficiently large scale to warrant his operation of a private fleet of pirate ships and a sophisticated pirate radio network. Well, the empire has been using pirates for how long now? Since the 16th century? These facts could not have gone unnoticed by a number of US federal security branches, including the National Security Agency and the Office of Naval Intelligence, which I think at that time was the biggest intelligence agency, the ONI, which are responsible for monitoring these areas. The Counter-Espionage Branch, Division 5 of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Air Force Intelligence must also have known about Jones's Guns for Drugs program via a different but related channel of information to be discussed below. Yeah, that's always how it works. You have You have gold, you have diamonds, you have weapons and drugs, and they just cycle. They're like kind of like a laundromat of illegal funds. Now, of course, human trafficking, which was going on then, but now I think it's much, much bigger. I think that. This brushstroke picture of Reverend Jim Jones's Guyanese colony is filled out by briefly considering the published and unpublished reports on the nature of the Northwest region of the South American British Commonwealth state of Guyana. The temple area of Northwest Guyana, where the People's Temple and several other US-based cult plantations are located, was a horribly desolate and virtually uninhabited region until the World Bank interceded in the mid-1970s to demand that the Guyanese government initiate large-scale marijuana cultivation in the area as a condition for rolling over Guyana's debt. The area was an ideal location for the resettlement of hordes of mine-destroyed US ghetto victims, organized into slave gangs through the use of sophisticated behavior modification techniques and drugs administered under the pretext of Christian-based pseudo-religious cults. Wow, that's just like an encapsulation of what they're trying to get the whole United States into this situation. Unbelievable. Just read that over again. Is that like the plans that are unfolding in microcosm? Adjacent to Jonestown is another 6,000-person settlement founded by The East, a Brooklyn, New York-based black nationalist cult known principally for its drug running and gun running activities in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn and in Hartford, Connecticut. The East, along with its affiliated Newark, New Jersey Kawaida Temple, headed by Leroy Jones, aka Imamu Baraka, was founded on the basis of a synthetic religious belief structure identical to the seven-headed cobra of the Symbionese Liberation Army, which was, remember that, Patty Hearst? Which was run through the same San Francisco channels that fostered Jim Jones's People's Temple. These synthetic belief structures, i.e. brainwashing systems, were specifically developed by University of Chicago social engineer Saul Alinsky, strategist highly touted and followed and studied by the Obama administration. The entire nest of ghetto zombies in the Guyanese marijuana fields were pre-programmed as surely as if they were mini computers. And this is, remember, 1978, this is written. Great deal of prescience. On the trail of Jones's controllers, it should be clear to the average reader and strikingly evident to the trained investigator that such goings-on requires the oversight of a layer of trained intelligence personnel with specialized skills in coercive psychology. While a full evaluation of who constituted the controller strata at Jonestown is not yet complete, certain obvious cases can be identified that represent the crucial starting point for any serious investigation. The two most important cases are lawyers Mark Lane and Charles Gary. Lane is particularly crucial as he has a background as an Anglo-American intelligence operative entrusted with classified assignments since World War II. Both Lane and Gary were in Jonestown throughout the period of the Ryan investigation. The two declined to leave with their fact-finding team and have admitted foreknowledge that the team would be attacked and that the mass suicide was pending. Lane and Gary's foreknowledge of a direct threat to Ryan's life, in fact, predated the fact-finding team's departure from the USA. Lane and Gary remained in the Jonestown area until the rescue teams arrived and were segregated from those cultists coerced into the death ritual. So they don't want the controllers to embrace death. They just want the hoi polloi. Lane was an Air Force intelligence officer during World War II at a time when Air Force intelligence was virtually run from the top by the British Air Force's Special Air Services, SAS. The same SAS that has been the principal British counterinsurgency force deployed both within and against the Irish Republican Army provost in Northern Ireland. Lane's tenure with the Air Force, until I'm calculating, I've been learning a lot about the SAS. Really sad that such tremendously capable guys are yoked to an absolutely anti-human, despicable agenda like this. And so my brain is reconciling that. Lane's tenure with the Air Force intelligence coincided with that branch's official involvement in Operation Artichoke, Bluebird, the predecessor LSD experimental projects of MKUltra. During the 1950s, Lane was an FBI Division 5 counter-espionage agent operating within the Communist Party, USA, on the East Coast. Division 5 was the creation of British SOE head Sir William Stevenson, and was run by a Canadian national and Stevenson protege, Major Louis Mortimer Bloomfield, and both of these guys were instrumental in carrying out the MI6 run assassination of John F. Kennedy. From the 1960s, while still the Division 5 agent handler, Bloomfield ran the Montreal-based Permindex Corporation. Oh, here we go. See, reaction video. See, I haven't read this. I love doing it this way. Now it's getting into what I just said. Montreal-based Montreal, isn't that how they say it? Montreal-based Permindex Corporation, a private assassination and drug running bureau, positively implicated in the assassinations of President John Kennedy and a number of European political leaders. Aldo Moro, probably. Maybe Olaf Palme. And maybe Alfred Herrhausen. Evidence that Lane maintained his Air Force Intelligence Division 5 credentials well into the 1960s is highlighted by the fact that he worked under British intelligence's Lord Bertrand Russell, the great humanitarian, from November 1963 on a project called British Who Killed Kennedy Committee, the first level of cover-up of Permindex's role in the Kennedy assassination. San Francisco-based radical lawyer Charles Gary was part of a team run out of the criminology school in the University of California at Berkeley, where my father went to school, law school, which maintained control over a variety of black radical groupings in the Bay Area, including most notably the Black Panther Party. I remember meeting Angela Davis. Well, that was not, maybe that was in 83. But this stuff was very strong in my consciousness at the time. As a member of the proto-terrorist, she turned out to be a big Hillary Clinton supporter. As a member of the Pro-Terrorist National Lawyers Guild, NLG, Gary's activities prior to the Jonestown Massacre bordered on criminal complicity in terrorist activities in much the same way that the activities of the Socialist Lawyers Collective in the Federal Republic of Germany eventually became indistinguishable from the activities of the Baader-Meinhof terrorists they were so defending. During the year leading up to the November 18 events, Gary was the channel of support for Jones from such Institute for Policy Studies affiliated radicals, a think tank, such as Angela Davis and Huey Newton. It is unconfirmed, but highly likely, that Gary was a recruiter for the People's Temple, drawing in former Black Panther Party members and Bay Area drug addicts and criminals. So sad. He had defended through the NLG and related channels This witting classification of Gary is further substantiated by his long-standing close association with the NLG's East Coast counterpart, Old Boys Leonard Boudin and Victor Rabinowitz of Rabinowitz, Boudin, and Standard. Boudin et al. Were responsible for the mid-1960s study of Caribbean and South American countries that would be prime targets for drug cultivation and chemical production, including marijuana, hashish, and LSD. Through the Boudin-Rabinowitz effort, an earlier cult, Timothy Leary's Brotherhood of Eternal Love, established LSD and hashish production distribution centers in the Bahamas, Costa Rica, etc. As reported in the New York Times of November 20th, Jones's entry into Guyana was paved by numerous leading figures in the Democratic Party, including Vice President Walter Mondale, Secretary of Health and Education and Welfare Joseph Califano, California Governor Jerry Brown, Senator Henry Jackson, Democrat Washington, and San Francisco Mayor George Moscone. All these individuals issued letters of glowing praise for Jones's charitable acts and services to the Democratic Party. They will support anything. It's party loyalty. It's whatever the unbelievably powerful dynamics of tribal loyalty to a political party. These forces are just, wow, they overrule basic principles. And I still can't get over it. I mean, the extent to which people who were part of this machinery or whose personal identity is caught up with it will turn their backs on principles that they once they would have defended. They at one point, the anti-war movement, they were ready to die. They were in the streets protesting. Yet a few years later, Obama's president. Everyone's cool with war, right? It's party loyalty. Since the mass suicides of Jones and 900 followers in the Guyanese jungles, these political figures have naturally attempted to distance themselves from the Jones death cult, either by disclaiming the fact of the letter's existence, as in the case of Senator Jackson, or by portraying Jones as a man who became deranged in the last months of his life. That was the picture that I got. As we delve into the early background of Reverend Jim Jones and trace his path from Indianapolis to California and on to the jungles of Guyana, it will become clear that Reverend Jones is preaching the dignity of death to a mob of suicide victims in Guyana last week was no different than the crazed Jones known to his Indianapolis neighbors in the early 1950s when he set up his first temple at the age of 18 with the revenues from selling imported monkeys. Good God. I don't know. Oh, it's so sad. Sources in Indianapolis report that a far-reaching cover-up is underway to conceal the identity of the Indiana-based networks responsible for the recruitment, brainwashing, and initial deployment of Reverend Jim Jones, of convicted mass murderer and Satan worshiper Charles Manson, and Symbionese Liberation Army soldiers William and Emily Harris, all former residents of that state. An investigation of the intersection points of these four cult killers would lead through the British Fabian Society-initiated Liberal Dissenters Church, establishment of Indianapolis and associated pacifist and New Left groups through a network of free enterprise institutions spun off the British Mont Pelerin Society and gutter level chapters of the John Birch Society, Klan and neo-Nazi gangs through the linguistics and related artificial intelligence projects launched at the University of Indiana in Bloomington by the 1940s into the executive offices of the Eli Lilly Pharmaceutical and Chemical Corporation and its associated Eli Lilly Endowment. So you see, it's all perfectly respectable. People have no idea. No frickin' idea. This is the network that picked up James Warren Jones, the son of an Indiana leader of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, and by no later than 1955, and shaped him into the psychopathic cultist who died in Guyana on November 18th, 1978. Born in the depressed industrial town of Lynn, Indiana, in 1931, Jones grew up in nearby Richmond, where he met his wife, Marceline Boswell, then a nurse trainee in a local hospital. He briefly attended the Bloomington campus of the University of Indiana in 1949 before gravitating to Indianapolis and the fringe religious sects in that city. After a short appointment as pastor for a downtown Indianapolis Methodist church whose congregation asked him to leave because of his radical views, Jones became associated with the Pentecostals, who believe that leaders demonstrate charisma by speaking in tongues, i.e., by entering a trance state and babbling incoherently. An extreme wing of the Pentecostals engages in snake handling and has been the subject of intensive profiling by members of the Tavistock Clinic in London and the source of numerous cult leaders, including Reverend Kirby Hensley, founder of the multi-million member Universal Life Church that was endorsed as a potentially valuable nativist endeavor in a recent issue of William F. Buckley's National Review. And we know that this form of Pentecostalism was looked down upon until it received the blessings of I think it was the Church of England, and a global organization, I can't remember, but they decided that it would be useful. So they gave it its blessings and told people that it was respectable now. The World Council of Churches, I think, which is run by the British monarchy. The Zionist lobby counter-gang. Jones's activities soon brought him to the attention of Rabbi Morris Davis, an executive committee member of the British and Israeli intelligence-linked Zionist Organization of America. Davis set up Jones in his first People's Temple, 1955, when he sold his own synagogue to Jones for $50,000, which was to be paid back over time, apparently on the basis of Jones's primary source of revenue at the time, the street corner sale of imported monkeys. $29 each. $29.99. To this day, Davis retains his 1950s function as a controller of religious cults. Presently, based out of Westchester County, New York, Davis heads an organization called Citizens Engaged in Reuniting Families. That's such a good feeling there with that. Wow. Which has situated itself to coordinate all parental opposition to such brainwashing cults as the Unification Church and the Hare Krishna. In fact, Rabbi Davis's anti-cult organizing is crucial to the development of hardcore terrorist options off of the cult memberships. CERF has publicly endorsed and contracted the deprogramming services of Ted Patrick, who kidnaps members of the Moonies. We did a video on that a while back. I need to finish that series. And other cults and subjects them to sensory deprivation, drugs, and physical torture, counter-brainwashing. The role of such anti-cultists is a crucial aspect of British intelligence's ability to maintain control over the cults themselves. That makes sense, right? You would anticipate that. The model for this sort of operation is most clearly presented in Brigadier General Frank Kitson's book, Counter-Gang Warfare, where Kitson describes the methods he employed to crush the Mau Mau in Kenya. After capturing Mau Mau tribesmen whom he paraded as defectors, Kitson organized synthetic Mau Mau gangs, putting his own men in blackface who carried out murderous raids upon villages sympathetic to the original Mau Mau aims. The net effect was to undermine the Mau Mau's base of operations, driving them into a narrow region where they could be mopped up. While in prison, Mau Mau tribesmen were subjected to intense behavior modification by teams from the moral rearmament movement that was spawned by the British high priesthood of the Oxford movement, whose agents later formed the Moonies. There you have it. For more on Mau Mau Model C terrorism. Rabbi Morris Mau Mau Davis performs a similar role vis-a-vis the cults today. The Mooney leaders literally portray Davis as the devil, raising the threat of deprogramming by Patrick and others to intimidate those members who want to return to reality. Through his Surf Parents organization, Davis has positioned himself to control independent countermeasures against the cults and to monitor and subtly misdirect all research into the cult's origins in much the same way that Mark Lane has done to investigations of President John F. Kennedy's assassination, which was very successful and continues to this day, where they get all Twitter-pated when Tucker Carlson says something, or Robert Kennedy talks about this in Big Admission, big release, right? The CIA was involved in the Kennedy assassination, RFK Jr., right? And everyone gets all excited about it. It's so bloody empty and useless and predictable, and what we can't do anything about it. It's the same thing here. A misdirection which leads to people getting excited over nonsense years later. At the time that he picked up Jones, Rabbi Davis was 1, rabbi of the Indianapolis Hebrew congregation, 2, editorial columnist for the National Jewish Post and Opinion, 3, member of the executive committee of the Federal Council of American Rabbis, and chairman of its Commission on Family and Home, and 4, member of the executive committee of the Zionist Organization of America. It all ties up there. It all ties up. The ZOA, founded in 1898 as a branch of the World Zionist Organization by British agent Herzl, Theodor Herzl. This goes before the time period that most people are hyper-focused on, the founding of Israel. It goes way back, way before then. And it's British all the way down. David Wolfson, of MI5 and others, is today associated with the right wing of the Zionist movement, specifically the ruling Likud Party of Israel, the Gush Emunim, and so on. It was his capacity as chairman of the Indianapolis Housing Commission that Davis would aid Jones's career, including helping him to get selected as a member of the Mayor's Human Rights Commission. The fact of Rabbi Davis's early patronage of Jim Jones is significant from the further standpoint that it establishes an unbroken continuity of controllers actually directing the activities of Jones and his quote-unquote disciples. Further investigation into the role of Davis should necessarily consider 2 additional features of his career that establish him as a cult controller. First is the fact that Davis spent several years in Lexington, Kentucky, just prior to his move to Indianapolis and his association with Jones. Lexington is the home of the largest federal experimental hospital dealing in drug abuse and behavior modification, and also an early experimental center for methadone maintenance, for which the drug was supplied by Eli Lilly Corporation. There you go. Lexington Hospital proper was not the only center of LSD experimentation during Davis's stay in the area, but one of the doctors then at Lexington, Dr. Joel Fort, was subsequently a key controller of Jones's Temple when the group was relocated to San Francisco in the 1970s. Second, Rabbi Davis presently maintains direct contact with terrorist circles associated with the Institute for Policy Studies, headquartered in Washington, D.C., through his membership in the Westchester chapter of the United Farm Workers, headed by Saul Alinsky protege Cesar Chavez, who is recently posthumously facing very serious charges of sexual misconduct against underage girls by an undeniably credible source, Dolores Huerta, who, if anyone knows the truth about Chavez, it would be her. She happened to be a friend of my father's. Shady, as my father told me, a very interesting anecdote where he was working for the California Rural Legal Assistance Agency, legal assistance for migrant workers, and they had just won this concession, really good stuff for the workers, right? And Cesar Chavez organized a protest against CRLA and went into my father's office and said, if anything good is going to be done for the farm workers, it has to be done by us. That is Cesar Chavez team. He didn't want anything good happening unless he had his imprimatur, his name on it, his face on it. And all of this came out like last week. And I grew up like idolizing Cesar Chavez. We all did. But, that's reminiscent of what we're going through now on a very minuscule level, but related to Epstein. You take this kind of behavior, you look at what the Moonies were doing, and you look at Epstein. There's a direct Epstein. There's a continuum. There's a modus operandi and a tangled web that just kind of reiterates itself, churns out new cults, new narratives. Where was I? Affiliated with this branch of the UFW is the Eastern Farm Workers Association, founded by Gino Parenti, a known member of a nationwide gun and drug running underground. I'm trying to debate if I should go any further with this. I think I'm going to do a part 2 because there's so much. And this whole issue from December 5th through 11th, 1978 is so rich. There's so much to get into. I think it's of profound importance, and I continue to insist this was a watershed year. So anyway, thanks. Thank you all for listening, and we'll get down to the rest of it very soon, I promise.